Jimmy, welcome. Thanks so much for coming in today. Tell us about your new initiative.
Yeah, so Wiki Tribune is a community-driven news platform. It isn't what we've seen in the past of pure citizen journalism. We've seen that that's been tried and it doesn't completely work, although there's some interesting things that go on there. So the idea here is to have a hybrid model with both paid journalists and community members all working side by side.
Right.
To try to bring some of that fact-based, fact-checking mentality that we know from Wikipedia into the news.
Right. So give us a sense of the editorial mission. What are you hoping to achieve?
The core is sort of facts matter. Like that's really the core editorial mission. Now, what exactly we cover, I think that really will depend on the community. But my initial thought is general news, politics, those kinds of things are what people are very interested in, particularly in the current era where there's all this concern about fake news and a president who lies every day and all that sort of thing. And so I think there would be a lot of demand for that, a lot of interest. But I also think there's interesting possibility of niche topics that people may take some of this in a direction that I hadn't thought about. That, who knew there were this many people interested in dog breeding, and there's very little dog breeding news out there, and there's that opportunity.
Was there a moment when you thought, okay, we actually really do have to do this right now?
So this is something I've been thinking about for a long time and noodling over, and really, but I always say the moment when there was a moment when I remember, like, okay, that's it, I've got to do this. And actually there's a tweet where I said, somebody convinced me, I was talking to someone and they convinced me that we should give Trump 100 days, right? It's an American tradition, 100 days, best faith, effort, let's see what you're going to do. And then it was day one when Kellyanne Conway said alternative facts, and I was just like, I can't deal with this. Like, are you kidding me? Like, we have to do something about this.
Yeah. So have you done any research into the appetite of the public for this kind of thing, or is it very much a kind of a gut feeling that you have that there's a need for it?
Yeah, it's a gut feeling. And it comes from knowing and understanding what communities can do, seeing for a long time what hasn't worked in terms of citizen journalism. But it's really just, it's one of these things like, I wish there were a news source like this for me as a consumer. And that feels to me very much like when I thought, God, it'd be great if there was an online encyclopedia. I could just look anything up, right? That's sort of obvious, right? That you would want to have that. And so for me, that's not really valid market research, but I think in some ways it's the best if you just say, well, look, I want this to exist. I'm going to love it if it works the way I think it will. I'll read it every day, and then I hope other people like it.
And in terms of kind of the business model itself, you'll be employing full-time journalists initially, and trying to grow that team, or how do you envision it?
Yeah. So we, depending on how well the crowdfunding campaign does, we're going to hire as many journalists as we can for the launch. Obviously, that will come in some stages. Of course, you can't hire everybody on day one, but to get as many journalists as possible, good quality journalists, and grow from there.
Have you got kind of a sense of how it might kind of develop on an international sort of basis?
Yeah, I do, and I think what's interesting about the model is that, of course, the software platform that we'll be building and sort of changing and modifying and growing over time can work in any language, and then the basic structure of the model is actually quite straightforward. And so I would like to launch in as many languages as possible, as quickly as possible. So in part, it just depends on the public reaction.
And in terms of the actual kind of stories that you'll be kind of going after, do you see the journalists kind of going after original kind of stories that they're going to be kind of, investigating, or are they going to be maybe, with the kind of the community model, thinking about, okay, so this story is being played out in other news sources. What are the facts here?
So I think there's a couple of elements there. So first of all, what a community can do really, really well is to aggregate and explain across what's happening in lots of different news sources. A lot of stories come and go very quickly, but writing almost like a Wikipedia-style article that is a long-form explainer is something that you can do from home, and that people do take quite an interest in doing that sort of thing. But what people can't do working from home is really seek out the news stories. They can a little bit, but not in the same way that a journalist can go out and actually meet with people and have the time to follow a lead and all that. And that's really what we want to focus on. It doesn't make sense to me in the modern world to pay journalists to simply rewrite stories that are already on the web. I mean,
right.
It makes some kind of business model sense for some publications, but it's not really fundamentally interesting. What's fundamentally interesting is to say, how can we get money to journalists to go out and research news stories? And actually, one of the things that I think community guidance can do here is to actually help figure out, like, what do we not know? What are the things that we need to know? And you've got a lot of minds thinking about and discussing and saying, well, look, this is the piece of the puzzle that really needs more research. I often tell journalists anyway, like, if you're going to interview someone, I say, don't use Wikipedia for the answers. Go to Wikipedia to find out the questions. And often that means go on the talk page and find out, what are the Wikipedians saying? Oh, well, this is a little confusing. Like,
right.
Sources contradict on this point. Hey, okay, there's a good question, right?
Yeah.
I can actually get to the bottom of something.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that, by having genuine community participation in a healthy way, hopefully, then you get that nice feedback, which you don't often get today.
Sure.
Typically, the feedback from the public is just the comments at the bottom, and they're typically horrible rants by horrible people. And I've not yet met a journalist who relishes going to read the comments on their story, because usually they're very rarely you'll find, oh, that's actually an interesting point, I should do something. Most often it's just like, okay, right, whatever.
Never look below the line.
Never look below the line, exactly. But if you've got a real community that's really sympathetic and actually working with the journalists on a regular basis, not in a commenty kind of way, but really participating in the process, I actually think this is kind of interesting then.
So you very clearly have gone for this crowdfunding model. A guy like you could have gone out and got investors. That was obviously a kind of a clear decision you made, and you feel that will enable you the service that you're going to be providing to be objective and to have its own kind of ability to decide what it follows and what's interesting to the community.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to go out and raise money from investors is obviously possible, but then it puts you on a different kind of schedule and a different kind of need for returns and so on. And also, to me, this just feels right. To say, like, if we're doing news by the people with community involvement, it should be funded by the people, community involvement, and to avoid kind of going down that VC path.
Sure.
At least for the time being. I mean, we'll see. I mean, you can only do things that work, so it's not a super, like, a religious point for me, but it feels important.
So let's fast forward a couple of years. Say your organisation is receiving a Pulitzer Prize for journalism. What would you like that to be for? What can you imagine that story might be?
I mean, I really think that one of the things that I think is crucially important is research, original reporting, investigative journalism, which I can see, for me, what would be nice about that is if it was a story that was driven both by the community and the journalists working together. And so I'm thinking real a deep data story about corruption. Like really digging through hundreds of public records, looking for information, which journalists of course do, but they could sure use some help.
Yes.
And the idea of putting more people on that and working together and really kind of piecing something together that actually has an impact would be fantastic.
Great. Jimmy Wales, thank you so much for your time. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That's great.